This podcast is produced by the Center for Deployment Psychology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice,
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do.
One colleague to another.
Well, welcome to Practical for Your Practice. I'm Andy Santinello, and I've got Dr. Kevin Holloway with me today. Hey, Kevin, you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody.
And we are really excited to have Sherrill, Dr. Andrew Sherrill with us today. Hey, Andrew, do you want to say hi to folks and let them know a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk about this stuff today. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University School of Medicine. I mostly work with Emory Healthcare Veterans Program. My day-to-day job is, using PE to treat PTSD and researching PE and disseminating it through training and consultation. I think we'll be talking a lot about consultation. I run our prolonged exposure consultation training program, where we train advanced PE clinicians to become consultants in PE, and in the process provide consultation to a lot of trainees. So we just completed our last cohort. We've trained about 50 PE consultants and about 100 PE trainees through the process. So yeah, I've got lots of thoughts about this. A lot of this is just going to be kind of, spitballing what I think is going to be helpful for people looking for consultation. I want to start off by saying I'm happy that people are listening to this conversation. I think it shows that you're curious, and you'll see that's kind of what I think is the most important part in this. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And, I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about your experience in not only training clinicians, but training consultants. And it's sort of interesting because, you and I met in a consultation group.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So we, I forget how long it was, but I, been also doing ACT for, all throughout grad school in my early part of my career, but was really craving, especially once I got licensed, to get consultation, especially from peers, people that had been around the block longer than I had. And I just loved our peer consultation group. It was so great. I think professionally and personally, it was really, really important for me. It was maybe 6 months or maybe longer. I'm not sure how long I was a part of it. Once coronavirus started, my whole schedule changed, so I had to leave it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to coronavirus.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Making people change in unexpected ways.
Yeah. But about that was, after I felt way more confident in ACT, following working with you guys for that time, and it inspired some colleagues and I to lean into ACT even more. We started a new intensive outpatient program for OCD based off exposure therapy and ACT, and I would have not felt that confidence and prepared if not for peer consultation. So I'm such a big fan of consultation, whether it's as a consultant or a consultee. I think it's one of the ways we learn in our field, and so important.
I'm glad that you said so. Obviously, this is something that's really important to you, and it's a topic that I know is important to me. Kevin, I don't want to speak for you, but I know this is also really important to you professionally.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's interesting to think back on my own experience with consultation. I remember being a student, right, in grad school and hating, having to video record sessions and show them and be scrutinized and criticized, and and similarly in training workshops doing role plays and all that. And then it was funny, like just after being licensed, it was almost like this recognition of loss, like, oh my gosh, I don't have that anymore. Now I'm kind of on my own. And I mean, of course, before licensure, it was all supervision, and consultation is a little bit different. But, I found myself kind of craving those opportunities, looking for those chances to bounce ideas off of other people and get other people's input. So,
I remember thinking like, whoa, I'm licensed now. I could do whatever I want.
Right.
Then it would be like, oh no, I can do whatever I want.
Right. And I'm responsible for all of it.
Yeah.
So there's that like responsibility or a part of freedom. It's like, I'm free and I'm responsible.
Yeah.
And I do think that I think in general, a lot of people that at least that we train at workshops at CDP also seem to recognize the value of consultation. Like we'll talk about consultation in the workshops and kind of like what opportunities are available for folks. And then there seems to be like a general agreement. Oh yeah, that's great. And I'm going to be there. And then something gets in the way, like between that and when we're actually holding consultation groups and calls. So,
yeah. And I bet you've got some thoughts about what gets in the way, Andrew. So what are some of the, I think probably you ask 10 clinicians if consultation and learning is important to them, and 9 out of 10, probably all 10 will say yes. And if it were like anonymous, 9 out of 10 would say yes. Most clinicians definitely value growth. So what are some of the things that you've kind of noticed, maybe like personally, but also in your work, that tend to be challenges for folks?
Yeah. So in preparing for this interview today, I thought about myself a lot. I thought about all the folks we've trained, and I think it goes a little bit deeper than just the availability of consultants and resources. I think this discussion is ultimately kind of personal. So I kind of put together, Andrew's list of top 5 barriers to consultation, and you'll see it kind of starts well before consultation, and really something deeply personal. So so I'll just kind of go through my list of what I think are the 5 big barriers, and I'll kind of talk about them and give people some actionable intel related to each of those barriers. And you'll definitely hear like my ACT bend coming through this. It's going to be pretty clear. And when I give some examples, I'm going to be pulling from PE experience and ACT experience, but I'm going to try to talk kind of generally for a broader audience. So what I've noticed, the first barrier, I feel like, are unclear therapist values. And this happens to all of us. Like, we often think we have a good sense of our values, but we can get out of touch with it pretty quickly, or we can maybe adopt other people's values. And I think when we don't really know what we care about, what we're passionate about, or what we really need, it makes everything else more difficult. The second one is a kind of a denial of your skill set. And I'll talk about why we might be in denial of our current skill set. The third barrier, I feel like, is our vague learning goals. And then all that happens before trying to find a consultant. But I think that's the fourth barrier, like actually finding a consultant that you can work with. And then the fifth barrier I have is an unproductive consultation. So to start off from the very top, I guess this get pretty personal, and I'd like for the listener to kind of allow this to kind of apply to them. And I don't want to talk about trainees as a big group, but kind of talk to individuals. We all have values as human beings. I don't think this first barrier, unclear therapist values, I'm going to validate. I'm not suggesting therapists don't have values. We're very passionate people that care a lot.
And let me just clarify with you, because that word values is loaded. And so my sense of it is you're talking it from a more of an ACT values perspective. And yes, I'm putting you on the spot here, but what would be sort of a definition that you would give to the type of value you're talking about?
I like to think of values as kind of a direction in life, kind of like a quality of like behavior.
Well, yeah, like the chosen life direction, a way of being that matters to you. Something that you choose as important versus being like a should or a rule that you have to follow, or you're going to be bad if you don't follow it, that type of thing.
Yeah. So maybe some examples.
Yeah. And I just noticed right now, I think I just noticed some anxiety coming up for me, because one thing I value so much is being able to kind of relay this information to people, because it's so powerful. So I was noticing I was treating it very carefully.
Well, and I'm noticing some guilt and shame coming up, because one of the things I value is making sure that people feel comfortable and I take care of them. And I'm sorry for putting you in that position.
Yeah. No, I love this. This is great. So for mine, part of my values as a therapist, right? And this overlaps with my personal life. I think sometimes our therapist values might be different from our personal values. Sometimes not. For me, I find that in the therapy session, I really crave freedom. I crave growth, learning, creativity. And then I think what was surprising to me was cheerleading. I love seeing this in my patients, but also in myself. So I'm always asking, like, in terms of behavioral directions or life directions, in the moment, am I helping the patient grow or experience freedom and independence, learn, be kind of creative in what they're going through? I think this is so important because it kind of can let us know, inform the discomfort we experience in our lives when we struggle as therapists. Where is that struggle coming from? And so let's start. I want to ask the listener to do this. So think about your last session you had where you know it was a good session. Take a few seconds to kind of think, why was it a good session? And I'll give you just a few more seconds with this. If you're driving, keep your eyes open. This is not a mindfulness exercise, right? There's probably some pretty personal reasons for you of why it was a good session. You might have seen, like in my case, if I see my patients learn something new about their emotions, I love that. I love seeing a new relationship to what they're going through. Or maybe seeing a patient exercise choice in a way they haven't exercised in the past. That's what makes therapy so invigorating for me. It's like knowing what we care about. Our emotions can show up when we're not achieving that. That's kind of the other side of the values. When our patients aren't growing or they're not experiencing choice, we often can maybe feel some kind of shame or guilt or discomfort. And that's potentially very helpful for therapists navigating the learning process. So the second barrier, often patients are in denial of our skill sets, because it's sometimes difficult to kind of notice that what we want to do as professionals is not what's happening. But you can take that discomfort, instead of trying to get rid of it or be in denial of it, you can kind of help inform what do you do next? In what ways do you need to grow? In what ways do you need to improve your own skill set? My actionable intel to responding to this barrier of denial of a skill set is to find objective means to assess your skills. There are fidelity rating sheets out there. There are patient outcomes. You can get feedbacks from colleagues. You can get feedback from your patients to see how you're doing. And if there is some discomfort, good. Ask yourself why. That's going to show you why that you do care in your own unique way, and can tell you what do you need to do. Consultation. What kind of training do you need next?
One of the things that's I'm kind of noticing in the first couple of barriers you mentioned have a lot to do with therapist discomfort and awareness of what matters, but also aware of maybe the gulf between how you want to be as a clinician and how you actually are. Mm-hmm. And, Kevin and I, just before we started here, we're talking a bit about one of the things that sometimes we notice, not only in ourselves, but in workshop participants who've maybe been in the field for a while, is almost this pressure to be the expert.
Yes.
To sort of hold on to this identity of someone who is competent, and how uncomfortable it is when you've been in the field for a while, noticing like you don't know it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And even sometimes the interesting things people will do to try to quickly resolve that discomfort or the cognitive dissonance associated with it. And one of the other things I'm hearing you say that I really appreciate is that it doesn't have to be resolved immediately. Like there's a value in sitting in that space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just, I'm sorry for interrupting again, keep interrupting you. Hey, Andrew, will you come on the podcast? And we're not going to let you talk. I think about one of the things I hear a lot from folks when consultation is brought up. I really want to do that, but I'm too busy. But I'm not sure I can commit to, doing 6 weeks in a row. Who has time for that? Like the reason giving starts to show up. Here's something that really matters to me, and it's uncomfortable. So let me find a good reason not to do it. And nobody's going to argue with you're busy, right?
Right.
Like, and you have to prioritize things. So.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, when people do that, it can disconnect them from their values. It's okay to sit with it. Like we can't be the best at everything at all times. I've only kind of really figured out PE and ACT. There's so many other things I want to do, but I'm just working really hard still in figuring out PE and ACT. And I'll admit, it's hard to sit with that, to know like, wow, I'm kind of incompetent with this patient right now. I don't know what to do with this patient. And I can kind of get rid of it with reason giving or promising myself, okay, maybe I'm going to do this in the future. Right. Or maybe just rely on skills that I have from another modality and try to use that instead, rather than kind of sitting with the discomfort and owning that these are my values that I care about. And from that perspective, instead of this rush to just get rid of the discomfort, which is what none of us want to do. We're here to help the patient's discomfort more so than our own.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So again, so all this kind of exploration of oneself, of their own values, and where their skills are at, it brings you to this third barrier that we see all the time, which is these vague learning goals. People go to workshops, even start consultation, and they don't really quite know why. It might be about CE credits. It might be about satisfying their boss. It might be some kind of top-down mandate. It might be because they think somehow it's going to be helpful to have just a lot of treatments listed on their Psychology Today profile, right, or their CV. And when learning goals are really grounded and linked to values, then you're able to learn with intentionality. I think one thing I like to say a lot is this field, providing therapy, is way harder than I think we kind of acknowledge. I think we always like to pretend like it's easy somehow. It's difficult, and learning any kind of difficult task requires intentionality, requires openness, vulnerability, and a person's values can really kind of fuel that effort that's required for intentionality. If you're not sure why you're doing it, or if it's for like these kind of more extrinsic motivators, the learning might be a little bit shallow.
That's a really important distinction you're making there that I want to highlight. So when the goal is, given to you by some external source, or is about getting some sort of box checked, like I know a question that often comes up is, how do I get certified in X? Like, how do I get the thing that says I'm competent to do this? And which is different than how do I continue to grow and learn how to do this better, So I think that sort of internal values consistent way of approaching training versus external yardstick, let me check the box way of going about training is going to make a big difference in the way you approach something like consultation.
Yeah. I think back at some of our previous trainees, and some are just so inspiring. Some were mentioned that they had just had hard time sitting with a person who's had their heart broken, who has experienced horror and extreme loss, and wanted, because of their goals, to be able to sit with patients with those feelings, to be able to kind of go through the valley of these strong emotions while they're trying to develop new behaviors and new perspectives. Those patients did so well ultimately. And when I gave them the certificate, it was like, oh, thanks.
Right.
It seemed kind of irrelevant. We have had trainees that have only really wanted the certificate. And when we looked at their tapes and we helped them kind of develop skills to sit with the emotion, they never developed those skills. And when it came down, to them asking for this certificate, we've had to deny it for a few folks because they didn't really do that intentional learning that developed competencies that we wanted to see. So I got to say, I don't want to just say this happens with trainees we've seen. It's happened to me.
Yeah, me too. I'm thinking about both of those two things, and I'm thinking about, gosh, there have been times where I've fallen into both camps. So, the reality is there are some times in our professional lives where we have to do things that are more about like get the box checked, and the motivation is just to do it, to get out of the way. It's just a reality, and there are consequences to that way of being, though. It sounds like what you're saying, and you've kind of seen that in your consultees.
Yeah. And the consequence is just ultimately getting even further removed from the value. You can start maybe resenting your trainer, maybe resenting just the whole field, and you feel like the cards are stacked up against you, like you can't get what you want out of things. So that brings me to the kind of the next barrier, this difficulty finding a consultant. It is true that it's very hard to find a consultant. Our field just hasn't really caught up. It requires a lot. It's a huge logistical and financial challenge to have an army of consultants that can help our therapists. So I do want to validate that. Yeah, maybe the cards are stacked up against you. Maybe it's hard to really develop in the way you want to develop. And I talk from a place of privilege. I work at an academic medical center. We have plenty of resources. I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't have that. So that's true. And it's true, though, that we do have a thriving community that's getting bigger and bigger of people that are willing to share and collaborate. And my biggest advice for finding consultants is to participate, to join communities, to join peer consultation, to go to conferences, to go to virtual conferences, to join Facebook groups. There's a really active PE Facebook group that has great questions, and there's connections being made all the time that are helping people achieve their learning goals. Often that does translate into a more formal consultation, but that might be down the road. Maybe for some folks in their learning process, it's helpful to have some informal consultation before they're ready and willing to commit to formal consultation, which is often kind of costly. I think I think we have to expect that right now in our field, consultation is going to cost money either out of your pocket or your employer's pocket or the pocket of some agency that's funding a training program. So, and my sense and my experience in the field so far is these communities are very open. I think I've noticed that we're all nerds and we all nerd out about stuff.
Yes. Guilty as charged.
Yeah, that was a surprising thing for my field. I thought like, oh man, all these cool researchers, all these cool psychologists, like, am I going to fit in? And then I realized, no, we're all the same kids in high school that were nerds and, just wanted to talk about nerdy stuff. And it could be simple as also like a listserv, right? And let the world know that you want to learn. And there's going to be people that just happen to have more experience than you in this one area. And they're going to crave like helping you learn.
The way you're talking about consultation is really important here too. Mm-hmm. And so I know the first thing I think about when I think about consultation is you're with an expert, you're talking in sort of hour segments over a course of time. They're giving you feedback. That is one way to do consultation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I really like what you're saying here about kind of let the world know you want to learn. Mm-hmm. And there could be some ways that are less time intensive, less resource intensive to at least sort of begin that process.
Mm. Right. I think that's like, at least I could speak for PE. I think for PE, the gold standard is like seeing somebody, a consultant for maybe 6 months where they review all of your recordings of sessions and they're rating your sessions on a fidelity rating sheet, meeting with you every week to give you feedback. That's great training. That's what we do in our training program. It's maybe not that scalable. If that's ever available for you, go for it. It's a great learning experience. And just people that have graduated from our program, we've got a small army of about 50 consultants that might be willing to help people with that. But that's not the only way of learning. There's things you can do before and after that can set you up. I just got some feedback from our clinic about how many patients I've seen in PE. So since being at Emory for 5 years, I've seen about 100 patients in PE. And I still feel like I've got a lot of room to grow. I still feel like I need consultation. In fact, we do consultation every week in our group. And it's such an important part of our process. So when we're talking about consultation, we're really talking about learning, right? And so learning can take a lot of different forms. If you think that the only type of learning you can do is a workshop followed by a very formal, a consultation program, you're going to miss out on so many other opportunities to learn.
And also from the consultant side of it, and Kevin, you and I often talk about this, coming up with more flexible models to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I mean, both Kevin and I have been through the exact same process you're talking about several times, with the intensive workshop and then the tape review, and which is fantastic training. Mm-hmm. And, it's, I think, maybe important for all of us who are in the business of disseminating EVPs to think more about how do we think more flexibly about what constitutes learning and a learning experience. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that, Kevin?
I do. And I think we want to put some effort and time and resources into thinking about other ways to support people in their learning and not, hold rigidly to that one model. I think it's important too. I agree with that. I've learned a lot and grown a lot in those very formalized, very structured consultation arrangements too. And there's, again, there can be resources and, like you said, communities and discussions that how do we help support that as part of the dissemination effort, rather than just saying, we're going to do a workshop and then you can come to consultation scheduled on these days and that's it.
Yeah. And for those of us that are more in the consultant or training role, there's so many opportunities to learn when we do things from less of a formal kind of structure. When we're thinking of like pure consultation or stuff on Facebook, right? A lot of these people that we work with, they teach us a lot, and it was very much bi-directional. And they challenge us. I think sometimes the more informal consultation has given me great things to reflect upon, so get challenged with how we do certain things. And I feel like our field seems to be moving more and more in that direction. The key, I think, is, and this is again kind of personal, like to let our field be a little bit more kind to everybody, to accept that we all have inherent like kind of value and importance from our own perspectives and our own situations, to not kind of think hierarchically as if like some people are the experts and have all the answers. Ultimately, we are all humans trying to help each other, learn to help other people improve their lives. And so like kind of just respecting that every kind of clinician's, professional's inherent worth is going to help us get better and better at what we do. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in these new models of consultation that are coming out, or like gentle touches, listservs, Facebook groups, group chats.
So it's shocking that reinforcement is a better way to help people, turns out, learn than punishment. I know you had one more challenge barrier that you want to talk about on your list. So,
so let's say, the first 4 barriers, right? You have an idea what your values are, you know what your skills are, you have good learning goals, you finally find your consultant. One big barrier is that consultation becomes unproductive. It's you're not getting the feedback you want. There's logistical barriers to being able to get kind of timely feedback. I think for a lot of these consultation problems, it stems from there not being a productive relationship. So I like to think of all consultation as occurring in a relationship. And so we've seen dozens of consultee dyads. And the ones that have like the best outcomes had clear signs of investment in the relationship. There was intimacy, candidness, validation. It's a relationship where there's only one difference between the two parties. Like one person happens to know more about one thing. It's not like supervision. It's not necessarily hierarchical. One person just has done one little thing more time than the other person, and kind of accepting that's the case allows there to be no power struggle. You can kind of get over that and allow for a relationship that's kind of defined by candidness and validation and vulnerability. I think to do that, to kind of overcome that barrier of having an unproductive consultation experience, is to talk about the relationship, to set up parameters. With all of our trainees, I set up a contract, and I'll say, this is the kind of stuff we'll do. This is when we're going to meet. This is the kind of stuff we'll talk about. Here's like ways we can signal to each other that we've maybe gone too far with the vulnerability. And it sets up expectations for both sides and opens up the door for both sides to kind of give feedback on how the relationship is doing. I think helpful thinking about the vulnerability is not just to be vulnerable, but to think like, what do you need to share in order to enhance behavior change? That might be like a recording of your session. It might be disclosing your own worries and concerns, maybe sharing your values, maybe sharing your dreams. That's the kind of information that is needed in consultation to set up learning experiences where you can actually change your behavior and grow.
That willingness to be vulnerable and to share your hopes and dreams and your fears, in and of itself seems like a theme throughout these barriers.
Right.
There has to be, and it has to come from a place of you want something matters to you, and you're willing to put yourself in a position where it may be uncomfortable. It may put you in a position where you're going to be vulnerable, but what you get from that is the opportunity to grow and learn.
Mm-hmm. I mean, really, it's so much similar to therapy. I mean, a lot of what we've learned about what helps patients is going to help us out. We're not different. We're human, right? We need that chance to not have the same kind of contingencies that we might be perceiving or experiencing, and grow in very much a values-based way, not a performative or evaluative kind of way.
So Andrew, I want to thank you again I know you're super busy. Thanks so much for I think you said you've already had 4 patients today. I don't know how you're making coherent sentences, which is amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, that's good. I'm less in my mind. I have to be in the moment in order to just to function at this point.
Absolutely. So, I really appreciate the 5 barriers and actionable intel. So maybe just really quickly before we wrap up here, if you could summarize what those barriers are, and then maybe just a little piece of advice on how clinicians who value growth could start to work through maybe some of those barriers to consultation.
Yeah. So I tried thinking about this, using these kind of actionable intel as behaviors. So the first barrier, again, so unclear therapist values. What you can do with that is clarify your own values. And for those ACT folks listening to this podcast, you kind of know what I'm talking about. If you don't, maybe talk to one of your ACT colleagues. Maybe that could be a consultation task for you with not necessarily an ACT expert or something you have to pay money for. Just talk with your buddy about why do you like therapy? What kind of makes you in awe of your patients? What do you like to see? The second barrier is denial of one's own skill set. And again, this is another ACT process to kind of overcome that barrier is to learn to not just accept your skill set with objective measures, but also the emotion that comes with it. And kind of notice that emotion that comes from maybe an insufficient skill set is a good thing. It's a signal about what you care about. And that could be motivation for the next step, which is instead of vague learning goals being a barrier, to be able to identify clear goals that are linked to your values. And because they're linked to your values, pursuing them with intentionality. So again, it's not just about sitting in on experience to say you did it, but have specific reasons. Like if I value creativity, right? How can I use consultation or some learning experience to increase the likelihood that I'm going to take risks with patients, that I'm going to ask the patients to take risks with me, and provide a context that makes that a reinforcing activity to do in therapy. The fourth one is difficulty finding a consultant. My actionable intel with that is persistence, right? To accept that it's not easy and there are possibilities. And we talked a bit about those, but I just want to mention just cold emails to people. A lot of times people don't feel like they're not going to get a reply from folks because there's some famous researcher. Everybody in this field wants people to do what they're doing because we're invested about it. So you might be surprised how quickly a cold email can be forwarded to the next person that you could get in touch with. But if that doesn't work, persist. And notice that there's no end to your values. There's always going to be a direction you can take in your persistence in finding the learning experiences you want. Then the fifth barrier again is an unproductive consultation. You did all the work to get patient and just kind of isn't what you want. And I suggest that that's often the root cause of that is a consultation relationship that isn't working for at least one part of the doctor. And to kind of think of that consultation relationship with as much intentionality as you do your learning goals. And I could go on more, but I kind of wanted to do just 5 barriers. It felt like a nice clickbait buzz, buzz list or buzzworthy list, whatever it's called. But yeah, that's all I got for now. Maybe sometime in the future I'll come back and talk many more about barriers, but try to make it not seem like a doom and gloom story, but kind of highlight all the possibilities that we have in our field.
Well, we would love to have you back on at some point. And maybe we can rope you in for some other things at CDP as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks again for joining us today, Dr. Sherrill. And we'll also include, if you have any other resources that you would like folks to know about in terms of consultation, we can include them with the show notes that go with this podcast. Mm-hmm. So this is Andy Santinello signing off. Kevin, you want to just say goodbye to the good folks?
Yep. Thanks everybody for joining. And thank you so much, Dr. Sherrill, for joining us too. It's been a fantastic conversation. I definitely have taken things from it that I'm going to apply to myself as well.
Great. Thanks a lot for having me. And thanks everybody for listening to this.
Thanks for listening to Practical for Your Practice.
Please feel free to subscribe, rate, and join in on the conversation in the comments.
Until next time.